Let me tell you about the day a girl half my size made 12 grown men feel like children. I still think about it. Years later, in the quiet moments, I think about it. Not the shooting, not the records she broke. I think about her face when she finally let us see who she was. That's the part that stays with me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it started. It was the third week of selection. If you've never been through something like that, I don't know how to make you understand. They don't break your body first, they break your sleep. They break your sense of time. By week 3, you don't know what day it is, you don't remember your own dreams, and you'd sell your mother for 4 hours on a real mattress. We were up at a place called Camp Halloran, way up in the mountains where the cold gets into your teeth and stays there. 40 of us had started. By that morning, we were down to 13. She was one of the 13. Nobody expected that, I'll be honest, because there's no point lying to you now. When she showed up the first day, half of us figured she'd be gone by Tuesday. She was small, not weak-looking exactly, but small with this stillness to her that we all read wrong. We thought she was timid. We thought she didn't have the fire. Some of the louder guys, the ones who talked the most and lasted the least, they made jokes. You know the kind. The cruel kind that men make when they're scared and trying to feel bigger. Her name was Tessa Hale. She kept to herself. She didn't laugh at the jokes and she didn't fight them either. She just did the work. And here's the thing, nobody noticed at first because we were all too busy dying inside our own pain. She never seemed surprised by anything. The cold, the runs, the screaming, the no sleep. Most of us walked around looking shocked, like we couldn't believe we'd signed up for this. She walked around like she'd done it all before and was just patiently waiting for it to be over. I should have paid attention to that, I didn't. The man running us was Staff Sergeant Dukes. Big man, thick neck, voice like a door slamming. He'd been everywhere and done everything, and he hated all of us on principle, which I later understood was a kind of love. He wanted to know who would quit when it mattered. The whole course was built to find that out. And Dukes had a special way of looking at Tessa, not mean, watchful, like he was checking something against a memory. I caught it a few times, but I didn't think anything of it. I figured he was waiting for her to break so he could send her home. That morning, the morning everything changed, the sky was the color of wet ash. There'd been snow overnight, not much, just enough to make everything miserable and slick. We'd been awake since 2. We'd done the cold water crossing, we'd done the litter carry up the ridge, and our hands were so numb we couldn't feel our own fingers. That's important, remember that part, our hands didn't work. And that's when Dukes told us about the drill. He called it the gauntlet. Some of the older guys had heard whispers about it. It was the thing that separated the people who could shoot from the people who only thought they could. The idea was simple and brutal. You'd be exhausted, you'd be freezing. Your heart would be hammering from a sprint, your hands would be shaking, and then they'd hand you a rifle and expect you to put rounds on targets at distance under time, while someone screamed in your ear. Anyone can shoot well on a calm range with warm hands and a full night's sleep. That's not the test. The test is whether you can do it when your body is falling apart and your mind is begging you to stop. Because that, Duke said, is the only time it ever actually matters. We lined up at the bottom of the hill. There was a course laid out, a few hundred meters of broken ground, fences to go over, a low crawl through the mud and slush, and at the end a firing position with a rifle waiting. The targets were way out across the valley, steel plates of different sizes at different ranges. The far ones were so small from where we stood they looked like specks. The rule was this: you run the course, you hit the firing point gassed out of your mind, you have a set number of rounds and a clock running, and you have to hit a certain number of plates or you fail. Fail twice and you're done, packed, gone. The first guy up was Coleman, big, strong, confident, the kind of guy who'd been the best shot in his hometown and never let anyone forget it. He went screaming up that course like a freight train, over the fence, through the mud, slammed into the firing point, and then his hands betrayed him. I watched his rifle wobbling. I watched him miss and miss and miss. He got 2 plates out of the needed 7. He came back gray-faced and silent and didn't talk for the rest of the day. That set the tone. One after another we went, and one after another we struggled. The course took everything out of you, and then the cold and the shaking finished the job. The best anyone managed that first round was 4 plates, 4 out of 7. Ray's got 4 and he was the best natural shooter among us. He came back furious at himself, slamming his helmet against his thigh. I went somewhere in the middle. I won't pretend I did well. I got 3. I remember the rifle jumping in my numb hands. I remember the plate I was aiming at seeming to float and swim. I remember the screaming in my ear and the burn in my lungs and the absolute certainty that I was about to wash out of the one thing I'd wanted my whole life. 3 plates. I came back wanting to throw up. So you understand the mood. By the time it was Tessa's turn, we were beaten. We were humiliated. 13 of the supposed best, and not one of us could pass this drill. We figured it was impossible or close to it, and that Dukes had designed it to remind us how small we were. We figured Tessa, small, quiet Tessa, would get 1 plate, maybe 2, and that would be that. She stepped up to the line. I remember she didn't look nervous. That registered finally somewhere in the back of my exhausted brain. Everybody else had stepped up to that line with terror in their eyes. She stepped up like she was getting in line for coffee, calm, a little bored even. Dukes gave the command, she ran. And here's where I have to be careful because memory loves to make things bigger than they were. But I swear to you I'm telling it straight, she didn't run the course faster than the rest of us. She wasn't the strongest or the quickest over the fence. She was efficient, sure, no wasted motion, but she wasn't superhuman. She got to the firing point breathing hard like the rest of us. Her hands were cold like the rest of us. The difference was what happened next. She dropped into position, and everything about her changed. The bored, quiet girl just disappeared. And in her place was something I didn't have a word for yet. She settled behind that rifle like she was settling into her own bed. The shaking that had destroyed all of us, it just wasn't there. Or maybe it was there and she'd made friends with it long ago. She breathed, slow and even, and then she started shooting. I want you to picture this, the clock running, Dukes himself standing right behind her, screaming at the top of his lungs the way he'd screamed at all of us trying to rattle her. Distractions on purpose. Noise, chaos, pressure. And she didn't hear any of it, you could see it on her. She was somewhere else, somewhere quiet, just her and the steel. The first plate rang, then the second, then the third, fourth, fifth, steady, rhythmic, like a clock ticking, not rushed, never rushed. Each shot landed in this calm, inevitable way, like the bullet had somewhere to be and she was just opening the door for it. By the fifth plate, the screaming had stopped. Not because Dukes told it to stop. The other instructors had been hollering too, all that manufactured chaos to test our focus. But somewhere around that fifth ring of steel, the noise just died on its own. One by one they went quiet, because they were watching. We were all watching, 13 exhausted men frozen in place, mouths open, the cold forgotten. She got the sixth plate, the hard one, the little one way out at the far edge of the valley that none of us had even bothered aiming at because it seemed like a joke. She hit it dead center. We heard it ring a half second after the shot, that delay because of the distance, and that delay is what got me. That's when my brain finally did the math on how far away that little plate was. That's when the hair stood up on my arms despite the cold. Then the seventh, the pass mark, she'd done it. 7 for 7, the thing none of us had come close to, done while gassed and freezing with a man screaming in her ear. But she didn't stop. There were more plates out there than the 7 you needed. There were targets nobody was expected to hit, set out at the edges just to mark the limits of the possible. And she kept going. 8, 9, calm as ever. She worked the bolt and breathed and fired, worked the bolt and breathed and fired, and every single time steel rang back across the valley. 10, 11, 12. 12 plates, some of them so far out I genuinely could not see them with my naked eye. She cleared the whole field. Every target on that range, near and far, down in a string of shots so smooth it sounded almost gentle. And then it was quiet, real quiet, the kind of mountain quiet where you can hear your own blood. The last echo rolled away down the valley and nobody said anything. 12 plates of cold steel, all of them tagged, and a small quiet girl lying behind a rifle breathing slow like she'd just woken up from a nap. She came off the rifle, she stood up. She brushed the snow off her front, real casual, and she walked back to the line like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just made the impossible look like a Tuesday chore. I looked at the other guys. Ray's had his hand over his mouth. Coleman, who'd been so loud and so broken earlier, was just staring with this look on his face I'd never seen on him, something between awe and shame. Nobody made a joke this time. The jokes were dead, they'd been dead since the 6th plate. And Dukes, I'll never forget Dukes. He wasn't surprised, that's what struck me. The rest of us had our worlds turned upside down and Dukes just stood there with his arms crossed, nodding slowly like a man who'd finally seen something he'd been waiting a long time to see. He looked almost proud, and under the proud there was something else, respect. The kind of respect you can't fake and can't force, the kind one professional gives another. That's when I knew there was more to this than a girl who could shoot. We didn't get the story right away. Dukes wasn't the type to explain himself, and Tessa sure wasn't going to volunteer anything. We went back to the barracks that night, what passed for barracks up there, and the mood was strange. Subdued. We'd been so busy mocking her 3 weeks ago, and now nobody could look at her without this careful sort of awe. She just climbed into her rack and went to sleep like always, and we lay awake whispering about what we'd seen. It was Rays who pieced it together first. Rays knew the shooting world. He'd come up through competition, knew the names, knew the legends, and he kept saying there was something familiar about her, the way she breathed, the way she worked the bolt without looking. A specific little habit she had of tapping 2 fingers on the stock before each shot, this small ritual. He said he'd read about that. He said there was a story, almost a myth in certain circles, about a shooter who did exactly that. The next day we found out the truth, and it came from Dukes, and it came by accident. We were doing maintenance on the rifles, all of us in a row at a long table cleaning weapons in silence. Dukes was walking the line, inspecting. He stopped behind Tessa. He looked at her work for a long moment, and then he said, quiet almost to himself but loud enough that those of us nearby caught it, he said her old call sign. He said, still clean as ever, Castrol. Castrol. I watched her hands go still over the rifle, just for a second, then she kept working like she hadn't heard. But Ray's heard, and Ray's nearly dropped his cleaning rod, because Kestrel was the name. Kestrel was the story he'd been chasing in his memory. Kestrel was the shooter the legends were about, the one whose record on a certain impossible shot still stood and probably always would, the one who'd done things downrange that got talked about in low voices and never confirmed, because half of it was classified and the other half sounded too crazy to be real. Kestrel was supposed to be retired, gone, some said dead, a name from before our time, a ghost, the gold standard everyone measured themselves against and never reached. And she was lying in the rack next to mine, getting screamed at like a rookie, running the same miserable course we ran, pretending to be nobody. I have to tell you how that felt because it's the heart of the whole thing. It wasn't just shock, it was a kind of shame, but a clean shame, the kind that teaches you something. 3 weeks we'd looked down on her. 3 weeks we thought we were better, stronger, more deserving. And the whole time she'd been letting us think it. She'd been carrying this enormous thing, this entire legend, folded up quiet inside her, and she never once used it to make any of us feel small. She let us underestimate her. She never corrected us. She just did the work and kept her head down and let her shooting speak when the time came, and even then she walked away from it like it was nothing. That takes a kind of strength that has nothing to do with rifles. Of course we had questions. You don't sleep next to a living legend and just leave it alone. But you also don't walk up to someone like that and start demanding her life story. So we waited. And it was Coleman, of all people, the one who'd mocked her hardest in the early days, who finally got up the nerve. It was late, the fire in the stove burning low, most of the others asleep. Coleman sat down across from her and he didn't make a joke and he didn't try to be tough. He just said he was sorry for the things he'd said the first week. He said he'd been wrong about a lot of things and she was top of the list. And then, soft, he asked her why. Why come back? Why do all this again? Why crawl through the mud and freeze on the mountain and take the screaming when she'd already done everything there was to do, when she was already the name everyone else was chasing? She was quiet for a while. I was half pretending to sleep, but I was listening to every word. And then she told us, not all of it. She never told all of it, and I understood later that some of it she couldn't and some of it she just wouldn't, because the worst parts aren't for sharing, but she told us enough. She said she'd walked away from it once, years back. She'd reached the top of the mountain, done the impossible shot, earned the name, and then one day she'd put the rifle down and walked off and tried to live a normal life. A house, a garden, quiet mornings, the whole thing she'd dreamed about in all those cold positions waiting for a target. And she said the quiet almost killed her. Not because she missed the danger. She was very clear about that. She didn't miss the killing and she didn't miss the fear. What she missed was the thing the rifle had given her that she couldn't find anywhere else. That stillness. That place she went to behind the scope where the whole roaring world finally went silent and there was just her, the breath, the steel. She said the normal world was too loud, too fast, full of noise that never stopped. And the only place she'd ever found real quiet was the one place that should have been the most frightening. So she came back, not for glory because she already had all of that and it had never made her happy, not to prove anything because she had nothing left to prove. She came back to teach. To take everything she'd learned in 20 hard years and pour it into the next ones, the kids like us, so that maybe we'd suffer a little less and survive a little more. And she'd come in quiet, under the radar, going through selection like everyone else because she didn't want the legend walking in the door ahead of her. She wanted to earn her place again with these hands on this mountain, the same as us. She said the worst part of being a legend is that people stop seeing you. They see the story. They see the records and the whispers. They stop seeing the person, so she'd hidden the story on purpose. She wanted just once to be seen as nobody. A small, quiet Tessa who probably wouldn't make it past Tuesday. She said our underestimating her was the kindest thing that had happened to her in years, and she meant it, and she wasn't being cruel. She'd liked being nobody. It had been a kind of rest. I lay there in the dark and I thought about all of it. About how wrong we'd all been, and how the most dangerous person on that mountain was also the gentlest. And how she'd carried something heavy for so long that the heaviest part wasn't the danger but the loneliness of being a name instead of a person. She finished selection with us. She didn't break another single record on purpose after that day. She did just enough, blended in, helped the strugglers. She'd drop next to a guy who couldn't settle his breathing and she'd say one quiet thing and somehow it would click. she made all of us better just by being near. Coleman went from broken to passing the gauntlet, 7 plates, the day before graduation, and when he came off that rifle he looked straight at her, and she gave him this small nod, and I swear that nod meant more to him than the whole rest of the course. When it was over, when the 13 of us who'd started that brutal third week had become the handful who finished, they pinned us and made it official. And Tessa stood in the back. She didn't want to fuss. The brass knew who she was, of course. The ones who needed to know had always known, but to us she just stayed Tessa, the quiet one who happened to be the best who'd ever lived. I lost track of most of those gays over the years. That's how it goes, but I never lost the lesson. I think about it whenever I catch myself sizing somebody up, deciding I know what they're from how they look or how quiet they keep. I think about the small bored girl getting in line for the impossible like it was a coffee run. I think about the fact that the strongest person I ever met spent her whole life trying to make less noise, not more. We spend so much energy trying to be seen, trying to be the loud one, the big one, the name people whisper. And the most extraordinary person I ever knew had been all of that, had reached the very top of it and found that none of it filled the hole. What filled it was the quiet. What filled it was finally, after all those years, getting to be just a person among people who didn't know any better than to treat her like one of their own. So here's the thing I carry, and I'll leave you with it. The most dangerous people in the world are almost never the loud ones. The loudest gun on the range is usually the one that misses. The real ones, the ones who have truly done the thing, they tend to be quiet. They've got nothing to prove and no need to tell you. And if you're lucky, if you're paying attention, you might get to stand next to one and not even know it, right up until the moment the world goes silent and the steel starts to ring. She taught us how to shoot, but that wasn't the real lesson. The real lesson was learning to look twice at the quiet ones, because you never know which of them is carrying a whole legend folded up small, just waiting for the rest of the world to finally fall silent enough to hear it.